This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we are back with more of our weekly news recap, giving you a closer look at the week's top stories across Chicago and Illinois. Before the break, we took a deep dive into the governor's race, but we still have more to get to. Our panel is WTTW political correspondent Amanda Vinicky, WBEZ city government reporter Mariah Woelfel, and Mike Lowe, who's a reporter for WGN TV News. We're also still live right now on Facebook and YouTube for those of you who prefer to watch. All right, Mike, we talked earlier in the program about the vice president. She is actually in Chicago today. Can you tell us why she's here?
As I look at the clock, I think she landed at Midway about an hour ago.
Okay.
She's here to participate in a couple of different events to talk about the abortion issue. She's going to be partaking in a roundtable discussion with the Attorney General of Illinois, Kwame Raoul, and Mayor Lori Lightfoot today at UIC. And then I believe she's going to be at a rally later with Governor Pritzker. This is significant because we have seen this be a driving issue to getting more people to register to vote, particularly young women. And so they're going to talk about these issues and why it's important to make your voice heard and getting that message to young people on the campus of the University of Illinois Chicago today.
I'm going to stick with you for a bit here because the verdict is in and the trial is over. So where did the jury land in R&B singer R. Kelly's trial, Mike?
It was a bit of a split decision.
Okay.
R. Kelly was found guilty on 3 child pornography counts and 3 counts of enticing minors for sex, but he was acquitted on 7 other charges that included obstruction of justice, conspiracy to receive child pornography, and all of his co-defendants were also found not guilty of the charges. This was a case that it's obviously been in the news for years now. He was originally arrested on these charges in Chicago while he was, I think, out walking his dog in 2019, and that was around the same time that the Lifetime docuseries Surviving R. Kelly came out and really brought many of these issues to the forefront. But what really, if you heard or read about any of the testimony, it was graphic. The jurors were shown portions of videos in which the victim in this case, who went by Jane in court, who is was at the time 14 years old when these acts happened. She told her story, and the jurors were persuaded by it. And we were talking a moment ago during the break about how courageous it is for someone to relive all of this and do it several times.
And I mean, when this was happening in real time, like I remember these headlines. I remember being in like high school hearing about all of this, and to know that obviously it's much later than high school and we're still talking about like justice is finally being served. That's got to be difficult for the victims.
These rumors came out, R. Kelly, many of us remember, I Believe I Can Fly was the soundtrack to Space Jam. And he's been atop the charts.
Celebrated for so long.
But there were always these rumors or it was talked about that he had this other side to him where
then he would show up at the Grammys or whatever, and you're like, okay, fine, I guess that wasn't true,
right. And so now he faces a number of years. He obviously has not been sentenced yet, but I think each of those counts he was found guilty on carries with it a potential sentence of 20 years
on top of what he's already
on top of what he's already been
30
convicted
years.
of. Yeah.
Were you surprised by the jury's verdict, Mike?
No. And I was reading some of the comments from the lawyers, and his lawyers say that the case was overcharged, and they expected that some of those other counts, obstruction of justice, and was he actively trying to hide the videos, and those things weren't going to be able to be proved. The prosecution said that they brought everything they thought they could make a case on.
Yeah.
I think we had already seen what had happened in New York, and I don't think it was surprising at all that the worst of the charges were he was found guilty on.
Yeah. Let's head over to the west suburbs now. The Downers Grove Public Library, it made headlines this week for canceling an event. What happened there, Mike?
So the Downers Grove Public Library was going to have a drag queen event, and these have now become, it seems like we're hearing about these nationally. There was one at a bakery in the suburbs just a few weeks ago. These have become lightning rod kind of social wedge issues. They were going to have a bingo game hosted by a drag queen, and it was to show, in the library's view, that they're inclusive of all communities, a one-night thing. But this rankled the ire of many conservatives in the community, and they said there's, a sexual aspect to all of this, and this is not something that should be happening on taxpayer-paid-for property at libraries. And they received a number of threats to safety. And so the library just said, look, if we can't account for everybody's safety here, we can't hold this event. So they had to cancel. And
these were going to be family-friendly events, right? And we're talking about a bakery and a library here.
Right. They were designed to be inclusive, family-friendly, and show,
just let them have their fun,
a different aspect of the community. I think there's a sense of, like, if you don't like it, then don't go to the bingo game. Don't go to the bakery when it's happening. But there, at least in the case of the library, whereas the bakery was a private business, the library, there's some sense of, you shouldn't be doing this on public land.
What kind of strikes me, this feeds back to our earlier discussion in terms of the aldermanic exodus. Also covered some months ago a hearing in Washington, D.C. related to the 2020 election and election judges that were threatened, stalked at their homes, really persecuted and threatened with violence. And that's why this event was canceled. It wasn't It wasn't backing down from the event itself. It was, again, a matter of safety. And that's sort of where we're at. And I have to say that is a very dispiriting and frightening place to be in all of these sectors, and something that I don't think we should discount for when you look at who's willing to run for election, who's willing to serve, and another thing that could be going on behind some of these decisions. Not just at big high-profile things, but the library board, for example.
Oh, and that's a strategy that's going on, because that's a place where you can get out to, in front of people, intimidate them. I mean, we saw this during the mask debates at school board meetings and so forth, saying they're going to come after you, and it's your neighbors. It's your neighbors, exactly. It's your friends, your kids' friends' parents. They're yelling at
awful.
You. Yeah, it's a very, like you said, it's a disquieting effect that we're seeing in our politics right now.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with WGN TV News' Mike Lowe, WBEZ's Mariah Woelfel, and WTTW's Amanda Vinicky. Looking at you now, Mariah, Riot Fest. That's taking place in Douglas Park today. This, though, could be its farewell tour at the West Side Park. Chicago Park District announced a new rule. So can you tell us the details there?
Sure. So they are proposing a rule that would require board approval for events in parks that will bring over 10,000 visitors to public land. Currently, the Parks Commissioner is the one who approves any money-making events on public land in the city to kind of, get those events through quickly. And so this, would put at least one kind of barrier to things like Riot Fest, which have been the subject of controversy in Douglas Park. Residents, activists speaking out against this massive, money-making festival coming into the public park, occupying it for a weekend, 40,000 people coming to the park, every single day, without resident input or say. And so this year,
that's a big disruption. I mean, huge if you live there, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood park. People use it in their regular day-to-day. And, this is a theme that we're seeing. Aldermen are also trying to get more say over events like NASCAR, which we know is going to occupy the downtown area for quite a while next year. And just residents looking for more checks and balances on these massive events that do bring revenue to the city and tax dollars, but that, residents want to have a little bit more say in.
The Park District Board of Commissioners has to hold community meetings, right, before the decision gets made?
Yeah, so that's something that they implemented, I think, in the past year, where they did, look for feedback from residents ahead of large-scale events, and that I think that they'll continue to do going forward. But this is just another check that would actually require a board vote. That hasn't been approved yet by the Park District Board, but it's been proposed at their meeting this past.
So to your point, this doesn't just affect Riot Fest. There's Pitchfork in Union Park, Lala, which shuts down Grant Park. Is it time for these concerts to just rent out Soldier Field instead?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the contract looks like for Pitchfork or Riot Fest, but as we all know, the city just signed another 10-year contract with Lollapalooza. So for the foreseeable future, that massive festival will be in Grant Park. But yeah, there are other venues that aren't.
Like where might these concerts be held instead?
Well, I mean, there's Northerly Island, there's Soldier Field, there's Wrigley Field. There are places that are, meant for large-scale events that aren't on public land.
And especially as Chicago looks at continually developing. I mean, there are so many of these mega development mixed-use sites that are in the works.
Lincoln Yards.
Lincoln Yards, the 78, One Central. I mean, there's so many. What is going on with McPier? It seems like something that there should be a larger conversation of what goes where, sort of think about it with some intentionality.
And this is different than like as we know, street festivals in Chicago, because they're on the public way, are free to residents. This is much different when there's a festival coming into your neighborhood. Lollapalooza is what, like $200 for a day, probably more than that. I don't know.
I wouldn't know. I haven't been there.
People spend hundreds of dollars. It's not like that's an accessible thing residents can go enjoy on the public park.
Are you going to Riot Fest, Mike?
I will not be at Riot Fest.
How did I know? I had a feeling. So as we wrap up the recap, I'm wondering what stories really stuck out to you folks this week. Like maybe they surprised you. Maybe you thought they were underreported. I'll start with you, Mariah.
Oh, excuse me. I was thinking about what story I'm going to be looking ahead to next week, which is the city of Chicago. And this is like a PSA. The city of Chicago budget season is about to get underway in the next couple of weeks. The first step is we'll hear a budget address from Mayor Lori Lightfoot about where her priorities are going to be. Like some of the programs we talked about in the past year, like the cash assistant, the guaranteed basic income program, the 911 alternative response pilot. Those were programs that were announced in the budget address. We'll hear that in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll go into a marathon round of 2 weeks of budget hearings. So, ways to engage are to call your alderman, tune into these budget hearings.
Which is important stuff.
Yeah.
Important stuff. What about you, Amanda?
So something that I'm not sure was underreported in a sense. I don't think over-reporting can be a thing, but at least
it can.
in terms of just the conversation and sort of social media and dispelling myths. And by the way, we talked about the ad that was aired by the people who play by the rules PAC, but Prof also, by the way, is behind a series of quote unquote newspapers that are being sent to homes across Chicago. And please do look at them with skepticism. They are very pointedly
real fake news.
It really is fake
Chicago
news.
City Wire, I think.
Yes, and they go by different names, but it really is political propaganda packaged as news. And so something that got a lot of attention, and I think will continue to, as well it should, is the quote-unquote Safety Act, that criminal justice law that I referenced earlier, parts of which have already begun to take effect, but really in a large scale will be in January of 2023. Both sides, I think, have stretched the truth some, and there is on that, and it truly is important, and I don't think it will be easy to know exactly how this works going forward, but that's something that we'll be continuing to pay attention to, both in terms of trying to dispel some of the fakeries out there, getting to the heart of what it will mean for folks' safety as well as the criminal justice system.
You watching the Bears-Packers game, Mike?
I definitely will be, and I think that's that's a fun story to end on, and that the Bears surprisingly won yesterday. Last week, and they did it in such a memorable environment.
Keep it going.
And to take on the Packers, who are 0-1. The Packers look weak for the first time in recent memory, and wouldn't that be fun to have the Bears at 2-0 and the Packers at 0-2?
That would be pretty sweet. That was Mike Lowe, reporter for WGN TV News, WTTW political correspondent Amanda Vinicky, and WBEZ city government reporter Mariah Woelfel. Thank you all.
Thank
you.
Thanks a lot.
That's it for Reset. The show's produced by Meha Ahmed, Linnea Dominic, Brenda Ruiz, Claire Hyman, Andrea Guffman, Charles Daston, and Andrew Merriweather. Dan Tucker's our executive producer. Ethan Schwab and Haley Bloomquist were our engineers this week. Monday on the show, flu season is coming, so our resident infectious disease specialist, Dr. Mia Taramina, will be back to answer your COVID and flu questions. Feel free to email them to us over the weekend, reset@wbez.org. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Thank you so much for listening, and have yourselves a great weekend. We'll meet again soon.
It is 12:58. This is 91.5 WBEZ. What do you think about a private helicopter tour of Chicago? Well, that tour could be yours when you give now at WBEZ. This unique view of the city is available only until 7 o'clock tonight. You can give now at WBEZ.org/donate.
The head of the United Nations has called this a time of great peril. One concern is the fighting around the Zaporizhzhia